And if you've been through that, then it's pretty scary to experience that and see the real power that fire can hold and the damage it can do.
Well, episode 2, Kevin, of our podcast, It'll Never Happen to Me. And this time we're going to be talking about fire safety more than we did last time, which was principally about security. My name is Charlie Burbridge, and I'm an amateur at this.
And my name is Kevin Roberts, and I'm even more of an amateur at this.
But as we stated last time, we're professionals when it comes to life safety and security. So the purpose of this series of podcasts really is to discuss areas of life safety and security, which we both recognise have very serious implications, and the emotive nature of incidents when they go really badly. But this is not meant to be alarmist. What we are seeking to do is share our experience of the industry, and in this particular podcast, we're going to examine the dividing line and the collaboration between the public and the private sector, between the individual and the state, and how that reflects on how we should prepare for life safety events, in order that if they do take place, we know how to manage them, and if they don't take place, we're reassured that we have the measures in place to avoid the need to deal with them. So, on the basis that I admit that I know much less about fire safety than I do security, the format of the podcast would be much more interrogative, Kevin, and we'd be searching your brain for all of the information that everyone might need, whether it's someone who runs a business in the commercial sector, or someone who owns or rents their home and has a family that they are responsible for, and therefore have to deal to protect should there be an event such as fire. And we'll dip into security from here and there where it's relevant. So let's begin by looking at pre-fire. From a security professional's perspective, I know that the security environment is changing all the time, because humans who wish to do us harm are trying to work out every day how to do that better, more harmfully, and have a greater impact on through either from committing crime or to terror events. In my limited understanding, fire never changed, and since the discovery of fire. So but if you peel back the layers, the causes of fire tend to adapt over time as we generate new technologies, or in the case of lithium, for example, which I'm sure we'll cover in due course, or in the case of the way in which fire transmits through a building. In the case of the obvious ghastly disaster that took place in Grenville a few years ago in London. But I know that also not to be the case. And the other big difference between security and life safety, despite the fact that they seem to sort of live hand in hand, is the central function of security is a psychological analysis of what motivates someone to do harm to society. And in fire safety, it's an engineering problem to provide the technology necessary to detect, suppress fire should it ignite, or prevent it from doing so. As a homeowner or someone who's rents their home, what planning should they really be thinking about when considering the fire risk in their house?
That's an interesting topic to start with, because one of the things that still amazes me today is the amount of residential properties that don't have some form of fire detection, whether it's just a simple battery operated smoke alarm or heat detector, or it's a wired in system. You tend to find now in newer properties that they will install fire alarm detectors, so smoke detectors, and they'll be hardwired in and have a battery backup. But that's in construction today. That's not covers the construction of houses that's gone on since the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And The interesting thing about that, the stories about that, is where people do have a smoke detector and it activates. I don't know, they've burnt toast or something like that and activates. So what they'll do is, to stop it from operating, they take the battery out.
Yep.
Or the battery becomes flat, so that the detector gives a warning beep every so often, which drives people mad. So they take the battery out, and then they don't replace the battery. And that simple device is a piece of equipment that will give you warning that something has gone wrong in your house. So the first thing is, if you haven't got detectors, you should have detectors, and you should make sure that the batteries are of adequate power to activate them. Following that, you should always have an escape route. So you should think about, in your home, you should think about, if fires developed in certain parts of the home, how would you, if there was an activation of the smoke alarm to warn you there was a fire, how would you get out of the property? So you need to think of how you'd exit the property. Now, you can't take every case, because otherwise you're going to say, well, if a fire breaks out in that room and a fire breaks out in that room, but you need to have some idea that if there was a fire in the downstairs part of your home, how do you get out if you're on the top floor? Or how do you protect yourself? So there are things that people can do without spending an exorbitant amount of money to try and help them protect themselves. But things like keeping doors shut. So when you leave a room, make sure the door is closed. So if you've got a lounge and you've got your television plugged in, all that kind of thing, close the door. Don't leave the door open, because then if there is a fire, excuse me. Then if there is a fire, at least that door will hold back some of the smoke, and an alarm will activate if you've got a smoke alarm installed.
Right, so let's unpack that slightly. So we've got in a way, we've got to take those two subjects in reverse order. In that, first of all, where is the most likely place in a house that a fire will begin?
Normally, it's caused by, in a lot of cases in homes with electrical faults. So where people will use a 4-into-1 electric socket and overload it.
Yeah,
so
when you say overloading, that's the standard practice of having a 4-into-1 electrical socket,
correct,
with extra 3-into-1s plugged into it,
correct,
in order to multiply it to a 12-into-1 electrical socket.
Correct.
Yeah. I've seen that a lot.
Yes, and that is just a no. But people do it, and that can be absolutely a cause of fire. In other cases, it normally is electrical. But if you've got a fire, or you've got an open fire and you leave an open fire burning, have you got a guard on the fire? So there are things that can happen in the house that we tend to take for granted that can cause a spark or ignition that will create a fire within the property. The other thing that obviously in today's modern world is mobile phones, charging mobile phones, because obviously they have a lithium battery in it which will ignite. People have got electric bikes where they bring the battery in and they're charging the battery within the house. So we do things and sort of take them for granted about, is there a risk to me doing that?
Yeah,
we've seen some instances recently where electric cars have been parked in a carport. There's been a failure of the battery, and the car's gone up. But not only has the car gone up, it's taken the carport and half the house with it, because unlike other materials, lithium will just keep burning.
Yeah,
it's a nightmare to try and extinguish. The industry is coming up with mediums that will fight that. But there's some extreme cases of with vehicles. I think the case in Belgium is that their response to a lithium battery fire within a car is they turn up with a skip, and they pick the car up, and they drop it in the skip
whilst the car's on fire.
And then they drop it in there and let it burn.
So the odd enough, I think with all new emerging technologies, it's often difficult to predict what the negative outcomes of emerging technology is until it actually happens.
Yeah.
And so the fire risk associated with massive lithium batteries, I think the fire risk associated with lithium batteries we've known about for some time, because airlines will prevent you from charging your phone when you're taking off and landing. And I'm not sure why the rest of the time it's okay, but but new EVs are a source of lithium fire risk, but allegedly. Some sources of fire have yet to be proved. Yes. I think there's an element of politics around that, I accept. But if you do own an electric vehicle, it's worth being mindful of the fire risk that enormous source of energy is presenting to you, the vehicle itself, and potentially the home, because of the heat that it generates.
Yeah, and in fairness, just as a personal example, a friend of mine's just taken delivery of a Tesla. And we've had the conversation.
Other cars are available.
Yeah, other electric cars are available, yes. But he's taken delivery of a Tesla, and he now parks that on the road. He does not park that. He's got a house with a carport, and he will not. All his other vehicles he's parked in the carport. He won't do that. He parks it on the road because of that concern that if something happened, it would take the whole of the house.
Right. So
it.
What I think what that plays to is a sort of sense of, and it's the same on the security side. There's a sense of anxiety generated as a consequence of the unknown, and really, if with careful consideration, you can generate plans and mitigating measures to deal with circumstances should they arise. So in that particular case, he decided to park it, put time away from the threat and the asset, his home and family, as it were. But in the longer term, if there's that, if one is unable to provide that time and space between the threat and the asset, then there've got to be other technological solutions.
Yeah, agreed.
So dare I say it, we're probably in a world where, a lot of this is associated with the insurance industry, of course. But we may get to a place eventually where, in order to be able to insure an EV, you have to have a fire suppression system able to deal with a lithium fire should it ignite in the carport.
Yeah,
otherwise
absolutely.
the car becomes, or your house becomes uninsurable.
Yeah,
because you're introducing a risk to to your asset that the insurance companies will expect you to deal with, or at least meet them halfway. I mean, I think if we go back onto the point about, because it's a residential question really. Let's go back to that place where we're continuing to work out a plan. If a fire is more likely to be ignited as a consequence of an electrical fault in the house. I mean, my assumption was you were going to say that they all seem to start in kitchens, but clearly the electrical circuits run all over the house.
Correct.
And
yeah.
if you've got a house where the electrical circuits were placed in the 1960s, which would be an awful lot of houses, and that house hasn't been rewired, it doesn't have modern insulation on the cabling, that sort of thing, then it's certainly something worth looking at. Particularly if you then combine that with potentially, old-fashioned insulation in the loft where you've still got wires, and then you have mice and so on and so forth. So as a professional, one might recommend that you've got to go and get these things checked by a professional electrician once every few years in order to ensure that you limit the risk of an electrical spark igniting a fire. So let's say you're a family, you have young children. Young children are located in separate bedrooms in the house. The key and the bedrooms tend to be on a first floor, or in townhouses on a second, third, or third floor, or in a skyrise, a high-rise building. We'll discuss the implications of Grenfell and potentially other disasters like that in a second. Because if we separate that out, because that's quite an emotive subject. But assuming that you have a multi-story house, you're not living in a bungalow, and you have young children, it's important I imagine as a parent to be able to say, look, here, if you hear this beeping going off, then what do you do? And whether it's to stay where you are, I'll come and get you, in which case child feels okay, but then reassure them the likelihood of this event is extraordinarily remote, which it is.
Yes, it is.
But if you hear this beeping, I'll come and get you, don't worry. and then to have an evacuation route. So I've always been told that in the event of a fire, make an initial attempt to fight the fire and then evacuate, and call the relevant service of the fire brigade. And the most important thing is to save life, and the save property is a secondary consideration, and salvage what you can later on, which is what many will. If you live in a thatched cottage, that's what a fire brigade are going to do pretty quickly for you. To come up with a plan that doesn't generate additional unnecessary anxiety, but shows a carefully considered evacuation route, and then rehearse it so that everyone in the family knows exactly what to do and when to do it. Should that beeping go off, even if it's a flat battery, thus creating the perfect example of a rehearsal.
The point I was going to finish off with was that I think lots of people don't think about whether it's on a personal level, whether it's in your own home or commercially. A lot of people don't think about what the outcome could be, and the point you made is right. It's incredibly rare if that's going to happen to you. But the fact is, like any accident or incident, there's a cause somewhere that creates another issue that means can escalate the situation. And if you've been through that, then it's pretty scary to experience that and see the real power that fire can hold and the damage it can do.
The next bit really is about fire suppression, which is fire extinguishers.
Yep.
And it's, to what extent is it useful to have them in the house? What sort of fire extinguishers do you need? How do you know you've got the right fire extinguisher? What are the differences between them? Where can you buy them? I think that there's probably some value in discussing, whether or not that they are genuine lifesavers. Let's say you have an electrical fire. What sort of fire extinguisher do you need for that?
So primarily you would need a CO2 fire extinguisher to extinguish. That's the recommendation. There are extinguishers on the market that let's go back. Why a CO2 extinguisher? Because and this comes back to training and understanding. Because if you use something like a water extinguisher on electrical fire, apart from the risk to you yourself, it will actually make matters worse. And
why is that?
Well, purely because water won't necessarily extinguish an electrical fire, and if anything, it can cause the fire to arc. So it can create a bigger problem. But secondly, you are trying to extinguish an electrical fire with water, and as most people should know, that's a dangerous thing to do.
Because the electricity conducts through the water.
Correct. And there have been examples used whereby people are fighting an electrical fire and the water is coming back towards their feet, so they're going to be stood in water while they're fighting an electrical fire. So the advice is you don't do that. You fight it with a CO2 device. To look at the principle behind extinguishing fire, what we're fundamentally trying to do, I presume, is to deny the fire oxygen. Correct.
And so if it is the water prevents oxygen from getting to the fire because it creates essentially a seal around the fire. Therefore, oxygen can't reach the source of fire. And in the case of electrical fire, so if you've got an electrical cooker or something similar, or you're charging through your bundle of plugs, and your Xbox and all that sort of stuff, then it is worth having a CO2 extinguisher there because the CO2 denies oxygen to the fire.
Correct. Now, so we don't complicate that between residential and commercial, because I would talk about them differently. Within residential, I would use an extinguisher that covers everything. So personally, I use or I have powder extinguishers. the only thing about powder extinguishers, if you use them, they're incredibly messy because powder literally goes everywhere. But if anyone in the home uses it in any type of fire, you're at least protecting the person that's using the extinguisher. Just to go back to the thing about water extinguishers, there are now there's been development for some time now in water extinguishers that have an additive that's put into the water within the extinguisher, that if you accidentally use them, no one would ever recommend you do, but if you did accidentally use them on an electrical fire, you won't be harmed. And it's the additive that helps protect you, and also the way that the extinguisher operates, so that the current can't travel back up the stream of liquid that you're using from the fire extinguisher. In the home, I don't want to make recommendations for anybody, but I use or have powder extinguishers, and I make sure. In fairness, I maintain them myself, but if you have extinguishers, you do need to make sure that they are within their useful use by date, or that they are maintained by a accredited company.
And the use by date sits on the side of the can, does it?
Yeah, there are extinguishers that you can buy from DIY sheds that are small. Sometimes people have them put in their cars. Small extinguishers, and literally they have a life expectancy, and after that you bin them, and you don't bother. They don't need servicing as such.
In the event of residential fire, let's be clear that the advice remains the same, which is to, at best, make a cursory or initial attempt to fight the fire, but the priority is to evacuate out of the building.
Absolutely.
But if you have the fire extinguisher at hand and you're going to initiate it, and it's a 3-litre powder fire extinguisher, sort of how long does that last?
It's about 15 seconds.
And you're going to aim that at the base of the fire, and that's going to give you a good chance to extinguish the fire initially. And if you can't extinguish it in that initial period, you move to plan B, which is evacuate.
Absolutely. And in some cases, you're using it to give you an escape route. So again, I'll just reinforce what you said. You don't ever attempt to extinguish a fire unless you really feel comfortable in doing so. But yeah, a powder extinguisher will give you about 15 seconds and will smother the source of the fire and should extinguish it. Obviously, depending on the size of the fire. But it would certainly should help you get an escape route. But yeah, the first thing anyone does is you phone the fire brigade.
You identified the fire, you ring the fire brigade, you are able to describe to them the situation, and the fire brigade deploys. Under what circumstances does the fire brigade deploy?
So in residential incidents, they will attend every time. So if you are phoning 999 and you're through to the fire control room and you've got a fire, that's it. They'll just dispatch and come to your property. Now, in fairness to them, they used to do that for commercial fires as well.
So to be clear, that if you ring 999 and you explain there's a fire, and you ask for the fire brigade would deploy to your home.
Correct.
And that will happen every time.
Correct.
So in terms of commercial property, the way in which fire is identified and potentially suppressing commercial property is different, because the majority of commercial properties will be required to have some form of fire identification, prevention, and suppression system in order to protect their property, and there may be an insurance requirement, or it's a good sense requirement. But what it also means is that there are circumstances in which the fire will be identified automatically by a electronic system, a technology system. Will a fire brigade deploy if a fire alarm is initiated automatically?
Well, that's a really good point, because they have changed the brigade have changed the way that they now respond. So as an example for that, now in law in Scotland, because there's been a change to the fire safety law in Scotland, they will not attend unless there is a visual verification that there is a fire. I think the brigades, the point that you made really, because of the numbers of firefighters have decreased, and the service is under huge pressure. They've taken a view now on false alarms. Now, the ruling really is theirs that they will not attend unless there's some kind of visual verification or there is a verification that there is a genuine fire, unless that property sleeps people.
Yep. So
if it's a hotel, they would automatically attend. If it was a care home, they would attend. But any property where there is a likelihood that people could be sleeping there overnight or at any time, but overnight, then they will attend. The issue there, and it's an issue that has actually happened, is that the fire brigade don't know if people are sleeping there. So they can make an assumption that, we've got a fire at such and such a hotel. Right, fine, okay. But there are properties that may have people sleeping there on a temporary basis. Now, unless the fire brigade are aware of that, then they won't necessarily attend. That's why if you've got a commercial property, one of the things you should certainly do is you should have your fire alarm system monitored, so that if there is an activation within the property, someone is picking that up. Because otherwise, you could have a property in the middle of a brown site, an industrial estate. You could have a very good fire alarm system within that property. There's a fire, the alarm activates, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And unless someone happens to be about walking their dog, who's going to know that there's a
right there? So what you're describing there is an alarm receiving centre.
Correct. Yes.
So if you have a alarm system in your commercial property, the alarm is activated. That alarm is then transmitted or communicated to an alarm receiving centre, and that is a private sector solution.
Correct.
So there are no public sector alarm receiving centres as such. That is the function of an emergency call of 999, and you. But in commercial property, you connect your fire extinguisher, your fire system, and your security alarms also can be connected there to an alarm receiving centre, of which there are many in the UK.
Yep.
And that alarm receiving centre, what do they do then with that notification?
So they will have a script as to what they need to do. So whether it's security or whether it's fire and there's an activation, they will instantly verify it and then contact the emergency services. Scotland now is saying that they need visual verification. So that causes an issue. Going back to the example I used about having a factory on an industrial estate, and there is nobody about to give visual verification. So in those cases, that building would burn until somebody saw or somebody heard something that said, phoned the fire brigade up and said, I can see a building across the road and it's on fire. That's
right,
a visual verification.
I presume then you could actually have a CCTV system that the alarm receiving centre could plug into to electronically identify smoke or flame, clearly not heat, but you could identify one of those two indicators, and that would then allow them to confirm to the fire service that they have there is a fire.
Yes, and I mean there are fire alarm systems and sensors now that will, to reduce the amount of false alarms, will filter out and sense that there's actually smoke in an atmosphere and will activate. The thing about that is, unless there's visual verification, with the greatest respect, you're not going to get in an alarm receiving centre is not going to get in a conversation with fire brigade about well, is there visual verification? No, there's not. But this is this particular sensor, and it only goes off if it knows there's smoke. They're not interested.
I mean, this is relevant for those people who are running businesses who have property that for which there is no presence overnight. That's the critical area of concern. And if there is a security officer or a night watchman or similar that's there, then they can go and verify whether that fire whether there is a fire, the presence of fire or the absence of it. So for those businesses that leave the premises overnight, walk away, having locked it up and secured the premises, and let's say, for example, I mean this it's not clearly it's not unusual because of the expense of having someone there anyway, but also if there's nothing of intrinsic commercial value left behind overnight, then there's no need to have a manned security solution there anyway. So if therefore you don't have that, you've locked up your premises overnight, a fire is detected automatically or electronically, the alarm receiving centre is able to identify that there is a fire, and you have a remote surveillance capability, CCTV or similar. Yep. Then the operator in the alarm receiving centre is able to confirm to the fire brigade there is a fire, and the fire brigade will then deploy.
Correct.
Right. So then clearly no one would ever want this to happen. But let's discuss for a second then the repercussions to a business if a fire has caused substantial or catastrophic damage to the premises.
Well, any business that suffers a serious fire, I think the last statistics I looked at, 80% of those businesses never recover. And again, I'll give you an example, which was a dry cleaners locally where I live. They had a fire which destroyed most of their business. They went through the insurance company. The insurance company paid out. They demonstrated that it was a electrical fault. However, in the interim, because there was one dry cleaners where I lived, someone decided they'd set dry cleaners up, and all the customers that went to the dry cleaners that had suffered the fire then used the other dry cleaners because they still wanted their clothes dry cleaned. And I think it took them 8 months to reopen, but by then
there's competition.
Absolutely. So yeah, some people have gone back to that particular dry cleaners, but basically now they've got someone in the town that's in direct competition to them, and they've lost half their business.
And all business owners understand as a company director or a director of a business, you know the serious implications associated with declaring bankruptcy and how long that will last, and the extent to which you are able to get into business, and your implication on your creditworthiness and all that sort of stuff. So, but in the interest of maintaining our non-alarmist philosophy behind this podcast, I think if we leave that to business owners and they understand the implications, the point really I see you're making is that this will never happen to me.
Exactly.
But if it does, then you need to have reasonable plans in place to detect first of all, prevent, suppress, and mitigate for the damage of fire in order to ensure that your business is back up and running as fast as possible. Because the moment it isn't, then you're then subject to all the other competition in the marketplace that you do on a day-to-day basis. Only you've now got the additional effect of a catastrophic fire. So there are lots and lots of companies out there able to provide fire risk assessments and technology solutions to assist in that process, and there is inevitably a financial burden associated with that. But the implications of not having that, were it to take place, are far more serious than the expense associated with having a suppression system, prevention system, or passive fire protection, as which amounts to fire doors, isn't it? I mean, it's so it's a subject that any business owner ought to be looking at in and taking seriously. And not the way I have letting batteries run out on the, which I never will now, Kevin.
Good.
As business owners really do need to have a look at why, what is the risk of the business failing, and if the building, the premises is destroyed by fire or substantially damaged by fire, how quickly am I able to recover? Do I have alternative premises I can move the business to? What impact is it going to have on my supply chain? What impact is it going to have on my customer base? Do I erode trust and confidence in my business by not being able to recover? I think if you look at similar supply chain sort of issues, such as a ship getting caught in the Suez Canal, for example, is remarkable. Some of the things that were on that ship that suddenly disappeared, and the global supply chains are quite fragile. Actually, they work on such low margins, so the effect is felt immediately. But if your small business or medium-sized business, for that matter, is dependent on key locations, key supply chains, key areas of dependency for your customer base, and that is affected by fire, then it's worth looking at that as part of your risk assessment of the business as a whole.
Absolutely, because in my experience, I've actually spoken to businesses, and I've spoken to the business owner, and they've actually, when we've talked about the risk of fire and the steps that they can take to minimise it or fight it, detect it, and they've actually said, we don't have fires. And that was the answer to evaluating the risk. We don't have fires.
Well, I'm not.
It goes back to the point you said when we say, "Well, it will never happen to me."
Yeah, I'm not even remotely surprised by that. I mean, I think the fear of fire generally is diminished because of a reduction in familiarity with it. I think when you do see a catastrophic fire, I've been in circumstances in the past where I've watched armored vehicles burn, and seeing and feeling the heat and intensity of a fire of that nature, and the immediate impact on human life is happily in most of those circumstances there's no loss of life, but it is a genuinely frightening thing to see.
Yeah,
when you see fire take hold of something and truly rip through, it is something that is truly frightening. But because fire has become a relatively remote possibility for most people, so it is easy to conclude that it'll never happen to me. So I think if anyone who's sensible about risk management generally will look at the impact of fire and then determine the risk of that impact. So if it's an unlikely event, which it is, but it has a high impact, then it's definitely worth taking some measures to prevent it.
And you are as a business owner or a director of a company director of a business, you have a responsibility now. Whereas previously, fire certificates were issued by the fire brigade, so they came along to your property, they did the survey, they issued you the fire certificate, and they walked away, and that was their responsibility. That isn't the case, and hasn't been the case for a number of years now, in that it's actually your responsibility to ensure that you've done a proper fire risk assessment of your business, and taken any steps you need to ensure that you've made your premises as risk-free as possible.
So we've discussed the implications of fire or a catastrophic fire on small businesses, and there are the same sort of implications but at a far greater scale for multinational business or large businesses, and there is also, I think it's worth focusing on the extent to which the private sector is able to support businesses by the provision of appropriate or adequate assessment, system design for identification, prevention and suppression of fire should it take place, and then the implications for businesses if those systems are not adequately maintained, not just in terms of fire but in terms of compliance. In many ways, again, the division between security and fire safety is marked by compliance. Fire safety is a heavily regulated industry where there are tangible engineering systems which are then subject to appropriate compliance. All of which the information is all out there, and we'll cover where to find that information over the next few minutes. But let's start then with, if you are a health and safety or head of health and safety or a chief operating officer in a large company, and you recognise that within your risk management matrix there is a fire risk, because clearly you're occupying combustible buildings and you're potentially manufacturing things which have a risk of combustion, and you begin with a fire risk assessment. How would you go about doing that sort of thing?
You certainly need to source a competent, recognised company to do that on your behalf, because it is now your responsibility as a director or head of health and safety or security within a building. If it becomes your responsibility, as we said earlier, as opposed to the fire brigades now, unless you are fully trained and can carry out that assessment yourself, you need to use somebody who is an expert in that field. And there are obviously organisations out there that can supply that experience, but they will come in and they will assess your property, your building, your workplace for risk to fire, and recommend preventative measures. For instance, where you might need to fit fire doors, how you keep fire exit paths and exit doors clear, how you monitor for fire. So they'll supply a report that will give you a standard for your company, for your building.
In a world, I mean, we are in the 21st century, we are overwhelmed by risk assessments. If you're a primary school teacher, you're having to fill out risk assessments for almost every aspect of the day.
Yeah.
So it's easy to determine, or to come to the conclusion that a fire risk assessment is no different from the risk assessment associated with a soft play area. And I'm not for a second belittling the notion that anyone being injured inappropriately as a consequence of bad governance should be ignored. But if you turn back the clock 30, 40 years, in our sort of the pre-HSCC world, fire risk was something that was extremely real, not least because it was more likely, it was going to be equally damaging, and so I suspect people took these things slightly more seriously because they're not buried in the bundle of paperwork that represents all the other risk assessments. But as an expert in fire and life safety, I presume you place that fire risk assessment right on top of the list.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, because and it is an old adage about protecting life and property, but you, apart from having regulatory responsibility for protecting people and your building, you need to ensure that you have minimised all risk that you possibly can to fire occurring in your property. And there's two things for that. One, that if there is a fire and it breaks out, you want to make sure that your staff are trained. They know what to do in an emergency. They know where the escape routes are, and you've appointed fire marshals or someone to take responsibility of counting people and making sure everybody is out of the building and everybody is safe.
So the next stage then is you've recognised in that fire risk assessment that you need to implement technology to identify a fire, should it take place, prevent it from spreading, should it combust or ignite, and then finally to suppress it if it does so, in order to create the time and space for the fire brigade to arrive and to reduce the damage in those initial period between the fire being ignited and the fire brigade arriving. So let's talk about how that works. So you have now a fire risk assessment conducted by a professional, and you have discussed it with them. You understand the logic behind their assessment, and you're now going to determine how you go about implementing a fire prevention system. How do you do that?
So, in most cases, the fire risk assessment has been done on a property that probably has some form of detection or some kind of system already installed. But the nature of the building and what the building is used for might have changed. But the fire risk assessment, as you've said, will look where all the risks are, and will make recommendations on how to deal with that risk. So it could well be that the building has adequate detection systems, but because the nature of the work that's happening within that property has changed, it might well be that they need to change the type of detector that they're using, so that instead of using a smoke detector, it might be a heat detector, because one of the functions they do produces a lot of steam, or chemical smoke, and then they will make recommendations on how you best deal or manage that risk. From then on, you need to look at a company an accredited company that can install and supply the relevant equipment or services that risk has identified you need. And that business will come in, they'll review the fire risk assessment, and they'll supply solutions or suggest solutions that can cover that risk for you.
So you mentioned accreditation there. So who is accrediting those companies?
Well, I would use an organisation that's certainly accredited by BAFE. So BAFE is the recognised accreditation authority within fire, along with NSI. So what it means is that the business you're dealing with has to meet certain competent standards, and is measured and audited against those standards to ensure that they continue to install systems or maintain systems in line with those standards, and therefore keep their accreditation.
So BAFE, they will accredit your installer. So an installer will come along, install this equipment for you, and then subsequently maintain it on a planned basis. So there'll be planned preventative maintenance, and then they will also turn up if something is identified as being defective or needs replacing.
Yeah, and to continue to have that accreditation, BAFE you will be audited to ensure that your work meets the required standards.
Right. So this is the installer company being audited by BAFE.
Correct.
And then that certification you as a company should be able to go to the installer and be able to say, can you show me your BAFE certificate, your BAFE accreditation? And they will be able to say, yeah, here it is. Therefore, I'm operating at a standard acceptable, national standards.
Yeah, and if you go onto the BAFE website, they will list the accredited companies in the UK. So it's a website that you can use to ensure that if you need to select a service provider, then you can find one listed on their website.
You've identified your BAFE accredited installer. He's going to come along. He will design he or she, doesn't really, forgive me, that's me as a dinosaur, I suppose. But they will then come along and design a system which is based on a series of components provided by a series of different manufacturers. And I just want to come back onto what that system looks like in just a second. But once they've designed that, they agree the design with you, then they'll install it, and then they are responsible for the maintenance of that system on a planned basis. So every X many months or weeks, they will come along and check it's okay, and then if something is defective or broken, they'll fix it. I understand one of the areas of innovation that is beginning to emerge is a self-detecting maintenance system, i.e. the system is beginning to identify in itself things that might be defective and being able to inform the company or you as the business owner or the maintenance company that this is broken. So what advantage does that bring?
Well, as the customer's point of view, it means that you don't need to have people on your site testing your fire alarm system, which can be a bit intrusive for people, particularly if they're using smoke poles or there are.
So what is a smoke pole?
So a smoke pole is a device that you can put over the top of a detector and literally smoke to make sure that the detector activates.
Yep.
So you obviously get length of pole depending on how high the detector is, but if it's in a void and it's in a ceiling void, then you might need some form of cherry picker or lift to enable you to get to that detector to test it. Where we're moving to now is that detectors that really test themselves and have an inbuilt capacity to literally smoke themselves to make sure that they activate. And what that means is that information will come back to an engineer. So an engineer doesn't have to go in a lift or a cherry picker to get to that detector. That information comes back. So it reduces the amount of time and need for an engineer to be physically testing a system.
Right. So if I presume the risk is then if you could conduct your planned preventative maintenance, the engineer will turn up at your premises, he'll have a look at the system, he will assess that everything is working effectively, then leave. If the moment he leaves, one of those detectors then fails, then he won't know about it, or you won't know about that until the next maintenance. Next planned maintenance.
Yeah, so a conventional fire alarm system, that will show as a fault on a panel. So that will register as a fault, so then someone should then contact the maintenance company.
But you don't know where the fault is.
You won't necessarily know where the fault is, although fire systems will be zoned, so you will know which area that fault might be in, and some systems will come back to actually individual detectors and will tell you which detector, when you interrogate the system, is at fault.
Yep. Under the new system, though.
But under the new system, it will tell you when it's gone faulty or there is an issue with it.
Yep.
So as a maintenance company, I can have that information come back to me. I will know there is a fault with that system, and I can send an engineer probably before even the customer.
With the right component.
Yeah, the customer knows that there's actually a fault with their system.
Right, and so what of the companies that are developing these systems? I mean, I think everyone's doing it. Honeywell's doing it. Siemens are doing it. Gallagher are doing it. Nimbus are doing it, and so there's obviously immense logic in the system or the process of doing that, because you reduce the inconvenience. You're creating greater efficiency. You're reducing risk to your business because you are able to ensure you're confident that the system is working effectively, and you get real-time data as well.
Yes.
So, as clearly, it's a sensible thing to consider. But I presume that in order to get to that place, you've got to do a complete refit of your system.
Yeah, but then if you look at the market recommendations, detectors should all be changed after 10 years. So you shouldn't keep the same detectors in for any longer than 10 years. That's the manufacturer's recommendation on any detector. So when you get to that point, if that's the point you've decided you've got to change the detectors and you've got to change the system, that's the time when you can move over to a new system and move over to a new form of detector. I think it also depends on your risk as well. So I think you maybe have to make a commercial decision that if you're a business that has a high potential risk of something happening because of the work that you do,
or high impact, I presume.
Yeah, then it's worth considering that and upgrading your system. The benefit to you, the benefit to you as a customer, no one installs a fire alarm system because they
like fire alarms.
or for commercial purposes, because it's an expense that actually generates no return on that investment.
Do you know that is one of the rare similarities between fire safety and security?
Yeah.
And it's a grudge buy.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, the fire will see it's having a bad attitude and a bad day and stop what it's doing, and therefore won't engulf your premises because it's because the fire is obviously being malicious. In an ideal world, in the same way as in an ideal world in the world of security, no one wishes to do anyone else any harm. No one wishes to break the law, but in a way, the fact that we have to address the threat of fire and the associated risk, and the threat of insecurity and its associated risk, is probably one of the rare crossovers in an industry which is systemically it's associated with each other, but there's no logic in the two things being truly associated. I think the only other area probably is that the companies such as Honeywell, Siemens, Gallagher, Nimbus, AMAG, who are manufacturing the sort of technologies to provide access control, CCTV, fire suppression, detection, are actually the same companies. So in a way, there's the crossovers between the two industries are at quite odd places, and in a way they're quite odd bedfellows. But that's probably the only area, the obvious area. It's a grudge buy. You don't in an ideal way you shouldn't have to do this, and it's a on the face of it an unnecessary expense, rather like the battery that you ought to replace in your fire the smoke detector that I haven't done. So I've as we've had these conversations, I've often thought about why are the two industries so closely linked from a commercial perspective, and those connections are very rare. Oddly enough, the culture within the industries are relatively similar, because the thing that draws many people into the industry, from engineers in the fire safety business, love engineering. When you go and speak to engineers, they're genuinely passionate about sort of ensuring that what they're producing works. Yeah. It's an engineering sort of outcome, and the end product is that they are protecting life and property.
Yeah.
You speak to guys who are operating at the sort of the high risk end in private security, so close protection officers as opposed to guards. They will give you exactly the same perspective on their industry as well, which is that they are genuinely passionate about providing a service which protects life and property, but they're just doing it in a completely different way. And if you stood your engineer next to your close protection officer, you wouldn't know they're in the same industry, and yet the outcome of their thought process is actually exactly the same. Now it's been it was a moment of introspection as I tried to understand why the two industries have linked so closely. And it has to be that it's a sense of service, I suppose.
And I think with all the advancements that we see in security and in fire security, but in particular in fire security, we're moving to a point whereby the fire brigade are basically saying, unless someone can see flames or smoke, we're not going to come out. The thing about the fire brigade saying, we'll turn out when we see visual identification that there's a fire, comes to the fact that they have had to deal with so many false alarms.
Yep.
And if they're dealing with a false alarm in one part of the town or the city, the point that you made about traffic, about the emergency services being under pressure, then to be able to respond to a real event makes it more difficult. So this is the fire brigade saying, we're going to respond, but we want to respond to real events. We don't want to keep responding to false alarms. And previously, that the fire brigade used basically a 3 strikes. So if you were a commercial premises, and I've seen this in banking where they've had a system and it keeps generating false alarms, and the brigade have turned up, and after the 3rd time, the brigade have said, that's it, you're off the list. We're not coming to if there's another activation, we're not coming. You need to get your system sorted out to stop this keep repeating itself. And then they have to go back and get it signed off so that they will then respond. So the point that you made then about security and fire, my view is that you can certainly have some form of a system installed within your premises that will, through an alarm receiving centre certainly, but I suppose you can do it with self-monitoring. But personally, I would use a professional alarm receiving centre that will be able to dial into that system, identify that there is a fire within the premises, contact the brigade, and the brigade will turn out.
Right. So when you refer to self-monitoring, I presume what you mean there is that your alarm is triggered. You've then got a signal to your mobile phone, and if you've you can fit a surveillance capability within your own home anyway, which links to your phone. You could be on holiday, and if your house catches fire and the alarm is triggered, and you have a camera inside your house and you see the fire, you can ring the fire brigade from Marbella.
Correct. I mean, yes. I mean, with domestic, as we said, because there is the risk that someone will be sleeping there, they will turn up. Yeah. Commercial it's different. So their ruling is in Scotland. It's under law now. It's not under law in the UK, but within England. But it looks like it's moving that way. And I believe the only brigade at the moment that will still turn out is the London Fire Brigade. Yeah. Which you sort of understand within the City of London itself because of the actual buildings within the centre. And
I think that really brings us also onto the tragic events really of Grenfell Tower, where and I think it's I think if clearly we've got to be highly sensitive about the way in which you address it. This is an extraordinarily emotive event that took place, and the tragedy of it is immeasurable. And it is likely that some of the decisions that are made that day have passed into myth, but there is a reason why people were not asked to evacuate. And I think and I'm not sure that's widely understood. And I think where most of the sort of multi-story buildings that are built today are built with the apartments as they're fire protected, aren't they? So every apartment is like its own fire cell, and therefore the fire shouldn't spread. How does that work?
Well, it's actually not unusual now for properties or premises to have a stay put policy, and one of the reasons is that actually it's deemed that you are safer to stay put because of the way that the building is constructed and the fire restraint that's built into your building than trying to move through a building when there is a fire, particularly when there's smoke, because you become overcome by smoke. You can make the wrong decision. You can get lost, and also depending on the nature of the building. So a lot of retirement homes, where people go, where they're sort of 55 years old and they can live as in a retirement home, and they're multi-level lifts. You're gonna have people in there that maybe not so mobile. They normally have a stay put policy. Not all of them, but it's something that the people who run or manage that property will consider, which is the best way to deal with an outbreak. And again, because it's a premises where people sleep and live, that there's no, we're not talking about visual verification here with the brigade go, and as simple as that. And I actually live quite close to what was an old Royal British Legion property, and it's not unusual for the fire brigade to be there at 11 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning, and normally it's around someone's activated a smoke detector by burning toast or something they've done within that's set it off. But I know that the policy there is stay put. Now, I don't live in a particular big town, and the brigade get there relatively quickly. But it's more around the fact that you can cause an even greater risk by trying to move through the building to escape the fire than actually staying put and waiting for the brigade to turn up, and then allowing the brigade then to manage what happens with that building. So you will find buildings now that have like evacuation chairs at landings, so that you can get people that where you can't use the lift, where they're not mobile, you can put them in evacuation chairs, and they can be carried down the stairs and help people get out of the building if that's deemed what you need to do in event of a fire. Otherwise, people are told that you also have disabled refuges, and that's where people literally stay and wait for the brigade to come and get them.
For years, I often wondered, when you see the high-rise building, you can see the impact of the effect of a fire in one of the apartments. So you see the burn mark up the side of the building. I would always wondered why that fire had failed to spread, and it's because of the fire. Each one of these apartments is contained as a fireproof cell, and then they're sort of stacked over the top of each other, so that you then get a multi-story building. And then in the case of, I think that it's fair to say that in far too many cases over life, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The idea of improving the aesthetics of a building by applying cladding to the side in order to improve its look, to increase the quality of life of people who live in and around the building, meant that the fire was transmitted up the side of the building underneath the cladding. Yeah. And I think my point earlier about sort of what happens during a firefight is that you're gathering information in those opening few minutes whilst the situation is changing dramatically. And if there is an additional factor that you're unable to predict, like a casualty, for example, then you're having to add that into your planning and allocate time and resources to be able to deal with it. And of course, in this particular tragedy, there was an additional factor which essentially had a negative impact on the ability of the building to prevent the fire from spreading, and that was the root cause of the disaster.
Yes.
Which interestingly, since then there's a government program called Waking Watch that's been implemented, which is for all buildings that have this risk associated with them now have an individual who is employed to be awake at all times, to be essentially a night watchman for fire. So in a way, in a world that's changing every day, we're now back to where we were in the 19th century, where you had people wandering around London in the aftermath of the Great Fire of London, checking for fires.
Yeah.
And we are back in that world where in the end, you have to be able to confirm the presence or absence of fire, and we're now doing it through ancient methods of having a night watchman.
Yeah.
But at least I suppose actually the good news is that it is reducing the risk.
Yeah, and it also something else that came out of that tragedy was where fire prevention measures have been put in, whether that was fire retardant boarding or building materials, and trades had come along later to refit different things, whether it was pipe work, and this material is then drilled through, and a pipe is put through the material, but there's a
breaching the cell.
Absolutely, but there's a gap, so that there's no fire retardant material then put round where the piping has gone through, or the cabling has gone through, or whatever it is that's gone through that protective barrier, which then allowed flames and will allow smoke to escape.
Right. So I suppose the takeaway from that is that you can't have a fire risk assessment and then expect that to be enduring forever. So if there is a significant change to your infrastructure, you've got to reconduct another fire risk assessment to determine whether or not the risk to you has changed.
Yes. Yeah. It's something that certainly on a standard practice it should be an annual event. But if you have anything significant change within your premises or your business, then you should have that risk reevaluated. Because we go back to the point. Regulation says that you have to put protection in some way, one way or another. So that's the first step. You do so as a commercial or business owner because you want to protect the people in your business, because that's the right you should do, and protect your property, and you want the building to be maintained by a competent organisation and the equipment that they maintain will give you some kind of protection or minimise the risk of fire occurring, and if it does, give you some way of escape and some way of maybe combating that fire. The repercussions of having a serious fire means that your business has got 80% chance risk of never ever opening again.
Yeah, no, that's a shocking statistic.
And the fact about that means the people that worked for you don't have a job; they have to go and find another form of employment, and you as a director then have to deal with all the insurance issues, all the investigation issues, and there will be a thorough investigation to ensure that you had taken all the right measures to prevent that from happening, and that you had all the right measures in place to deal with it if something did happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point, because as a statutory director of a business, you have a legal responsibility to ensure that you're conducting business in a legal and ethical manner.
Yeah.
So you are in the event of a catastrophic fire, you have the immediate tragedy of losing your business. But if in subsequent investigation it turns out that you hadn't conducted yourself in accordance with fire regulations, or you had been unethical in terms of and that's such a broad definition.
Yeah.
Unethical in the way in which you have treated your employees and any other stakeholders who might get wrapped up in the fire. Let's say, additional neighbouring businesses are impacted as well. Then that has you are legally responsible in the long term for that.
Yeah.
So the repercussions are incredibly serious.
Oh, minimum it's a fine. Maximum it's prison.
Yeah, that is true. Bloody hell. When you the implications of an electrical fault leading to a prison sentence. If you take the two ends of that piece of string, it is a frightening prospect. But there are examples where major companies have been fined a great deal of money for not being in compliance with fire regulations, and this is boiled down to, I understand you were telling me earlier that the practice that we all know and love about putting the heavy fire extinguisher to keep the fire door open is holy crap, we've all seen it, and that sort of thing is in contravention of fire regulations, which might lead to a fire, which ultimately leads to, if you're fortunate, a fine.
Yeah, and a significant fine. So I mean, over the past few years, we've seen petrochemical companies, retailers, food retailers, where there's been an audit carried out on the premises, and they've found that escape routes have been blocked, fire call buttons have been covered. Staff haven't been trained properly, so in the event of a fire, they're not actually really sure what they should do. Fire drills haven't been carried out. They haven't practiced the fact of an evacuation, because the business has just got on with its everyday work and thought, well, we'll just store those boxes there. The fact that it's actually a fire route to get people out of the premises, and I can think of just of three businesses that collectively between them it's £750,000. So these businesses are getting fined £300,000, £400,000 for non-compliance. These aren't buildings that have had a fire. These are buildings that haven't had a fire, but they've been audited and found out that actually they don't comply to the fire risk assessment that they've had carried out, and that paths out of escape have been blocked, or people can't access a fire extinguisher, or fire doors have been left open and then there's a fire and smoke just travels straight through the building. I just think it's a way that some businesses might view it. So you need to have your weekly alarm bell check. You need to make sure that the alarm system rings. You need to have regular evacuation, so you need to practice what happens in the case that a fire alarm is activated and that people go through, and that you make sure everybody's out of the building. You do your register, which is, we're talking about fire marshals or fire wardens, and people sometimes do that because they know they need to do it as a requirement.
Yeah.
I guess, having spent the amount of time I have in this industry, if I could change anything, I would change people's view as to not making a requirement, but something they want to do, and feel they need to do, not because of regulatory pressures, but because it will save people and it will save their business.
And everyone's busy, and the fire alarm tests at Tuesday at 4 o'clock or wherever, because we've got to a point now where people are informed it's going to take place in 7 hours' time. So there will be a fire test today at 4 o'clock. Okay, fine. So don't react to it. That's a serious reason. But I think there's another reason, which is that don't complain when it happens.
No,
because this is really, really important. But the next thing, of course, is that when you're in that, the evacuation point, and everyone's milling around, the difficult task of confirming that everyone is there has to begin when everyone has strolled out of the building nice and slowly. So the time it takes to confirm that everyone is there needs to be very, very limited. And most companies haven't, because the technology is really only just emerging. If you haven't employed a technological solution to confirming the absence of mobile phones in the building, then you're having to count heads in the rain at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of winter, when people don't really want to be doing this because they had an important meeting to go to. And so that process has to be rehearsed, and people need to be able to take it seriously. And that is a management commitment. Yeah. It is important that senior managers convey the importance of being disciplined in the event of an emergency. And
it's also important to the brigade, because when the brigade turn up, they don't just go roaring straight in with all their hoses pulled out and put 50,000 litres of water through the building. They will turn up. They will want to know where the fire logbook is. They want to know what the history of the property is. Does it suffer from false alarms? They'll want to know if anyone's seen fire, where the visual verification was of that fire. They'll want to look at the panel, if they can get to the panel, and they'll want to know if there are any people left in the building.
Right. So let's go through that in a bit more detail, because that's a really, really important point. What do you do when the fire brigade turns up to your business? There's your home. It's much easier to deal with, because you're going to be standing on the outside the front of your house. You'll be pointing at the fire. The fire brigade will turn up. They'll be massively reassuring, utterly calm, totally professional, and you're then going to explain, like, it's there are 4 of us in the family. These are my 2 kids. There's my spouse, my girlfriend. Hopefully they'll never meet. And and there is the fire. Super simple. In terms of, let's say it's a worst case scenario. It's winter, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's already dark, and the fire brigade turns up. The fire engine arrives at the property. You need to have someone there who's ready to meet the fire brigade.
Yes. And
so that designated fire warden cannot be, someone who doesn't understand how the building works. They need to be able to say, look, it's 11 floors. This is the location of the access points. We've disabled the access control system at the front, so the gates are open. You can access, the lifts are here, the stairs are here. We have confirmed that there are, to our best of our knowledge, everyone has exited the building, but we don't know who turns up to work every day, because we do flexible working, and but that the vast majority of people are not here. We've detected that there is a fire on the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor is accessed by this point, and the fire is located at this point here. Then you can go through the bureaucratic bit about where is the control panel and so on and so forth. And that fire warden needs to know that. I think when my point earlier about in the event of any crisis, you're relying on people who are not doing their day job, as it were. They're having to make decisions based on an assessment of the situation, who might not be at the top of the company. So this is not the head of health and safety making these decisions. It's the fire warden, and that fire warden needs to be provided with the information, the training, the confidence to be able to guide the fire brigade when they turn up.
Yeah.
So we've covered, over the course of our conversation, the responsibility that we have as citizens to prepare for the unlikely event of a fire, whether it's in your home or in your business. If you're a business owner, you also have responsibilities to those people who you are employing to provide them with a healthy and safety environment, and that incorporates the need to be able to prepare for the unlikely event of a fire, and also understand the risk to you as a statutory director of the impact of a catastrophic fire on your business, or even a fire that's going to put you out of business for a limited amount of time, and how much that would affect you. But also importantly, I think what has been interesting in my view about the conversation we've had really is to really dig into the relationship between us as citizens, we, the private sector, and the fire brigade themselves. And we live in a world of criticism, and we live in a world of potential litigation. And like the other emergency services, the fire brigade have, in my view, come up against unnecessary criticism, because it is easy for us to forget that these are men and women who are prepared to put exchange their life for the life of others, and that is something which should never be considered lightly. And they respond to every event of a residential fire, guaranteed, as you described. And once a fire has been identified visually in a commercial property, they will arrive to save life there, and they are highly professional people who are extraordinarily courageous. And those people who have seen a fire or been close enough to experience a fire taking hold of an object, it is a truly frightening experience when it just rips through a building or a vehicle or something similar. So so I think rather like, in many ways, security or our responsibility as a citizen to contribute to a secure environment. In fire safety, we are responsible to ourselves for the provision of a safe environment for ourselves and our family, for ourselves and our employees, or as a fire warden, a responsibility to them to be able to do their job properly, and they then have a responsibility to other people, their colleagues in the business, to ensure that they are evacuated from the building in a safe and a sensible manner. Then hand over to the fire brigade, whose job it is then to do everything they can to save life. And actually associated with that property as well, but it's principally to save life. So I think it's fair to say that this is a complicated and emotive subject, as is security, but in a very different way. It's something that we ought to. I think it is easy to overlook the risk of fire because it's a relatively unlikely event these days, with fewer open fires and so on and so forth, fewer thatch buildings, fewer sort of major industry, that could generate fire. But actually, it is a risk that still exists, and we have to continue to take it seriously. And if you look at the provisions that have now been implemented as a consequence of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, we are turning the clock back 150 years to a manned solution to have someone awake in a building to check for fires. So it is to reflect on a comment that we made at the beginning of the podcast. Fire has not changed. The what is combusting may have developed and changed, and technologies have developed to create new risks. But fundamentally, it is still the same thing. And the risk is that generates complacency. And what I've learned from you today really is that not only that you collect fire extinguishers, which I will never forget, but that this is a deeply complex subject with a complex interrelation between engineering expertise, risk identification and analysis, stakeholder engagement, and a sense of responsibility to others to ensure that everything we do increases the chances of this never happening to us.
Yeah, and I think one of the areas that we've talked about how fire starts and the damage it can cause to your business, to people who work within your business or within your home, but the one thing we probably haven't discussed, which is a source of fire, is arson. So we also know that there are...
the integration between security and fire. At last, another crossover point. There's another podcast, I think.
Yes, I think
that is a really interesting subject. So
I think it's something we need to talk about at some point, yeah.
Yeah. How on earth did we overlook that? We've got something else to talk about next time. So the immediate crossover between crime, therefore security, and fire is arson. And,
yep.
well, that's going to be an interesting subject to delve into.
Yep.